Bad days aren't a recent phenomenon. People have been getting up on the wrong side of cranky since the dawn of time. In fact, on many occasions, misunderstandings, slip-ups, and other gaffes have dramatically altered the course of global events. So, today, we're sorting through the biggest historical mix-ups that got way out of hand, or nearly did. But first, don't make the mistake of not subscribing to the Weird History channel. After that, head down to the comments and let us know what other fateful foul-ups you want to hear about. All right, let's make like Beck and get into some mixed business. One of the most dramatic assassinations in all of English history was likely the result of a simple misunderstanding. If only people would talk it out before pulling out the knives. When King Henry II originally elevated his Chancellor Thomas Becket to the role of Archbishop of Canterbury, the two men were close friends. But their relationship became strained by a number of work-related disputes. In particular, Becket favored the long-standing tradition where accused members of the clergy were tried in special courts, often leading to lighter sentences. King Henry, however, opposed this practice and wanted to go after members of the clergy in his own official proceedings. In other words, he preferred to trash talk directly to the church. In 1164, Becket fled persecution by Henry and moved to France, where he remained for 6 years. Finally, the two men worked out a compromise that would allow Becket to return to England. But upon his arrival, he continued to flaunt his own authority and ignore the king's wishes. This included excommunicating a number of personal rivals, such as Archbishop Roger de Pont-l'Evêque of York, who had ordained Henry's son as Henry the Young King during Becket's absence. This flagrant excommunication infuriated Henry, who was heard to exclaim something like, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" It's unclear whether or not the king was being literal or just like venting for a second. But 4 of his less emotionally intelligent knights, led by Reginald Fitzurse, took the comment as marching orders and headed off to Canterbury. On December 29th, they encountered the archbishop in his cathedral. It seems likely that the foursome did not intend to kill him, but merely to scare him, or perhaps bring him back to Henry to face justice. But things did not go according to plan. After Becket resisted the knights' attempts to drag him outside, one of them struck Becket on the head, causing a deep, bloody wound. The others figured it was too late to turn back now and joined in the attack, ultimately cracking Becket's skull against the cathedral floor and ending his life. Henry was apparently horrified upon hearing the news and blamed himself, donning sackcloth and ashes and going without food for 3 days as penance. The church honored Becket as a martyr and canonized him in 1173, making Canterbury Cathedral a popular destination for English pilgrimages. In fact, you may have heard some tales about some of the pilgrims who were heading there, right? Some Canterbury tales. They were written by that guy in A Knight's Tale. You'd think being a chauffeur would be less pressure than being a king. Unfortunately, you'd be wrong. In 1913, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the younger brother of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, was appointed Inspector General of the Austro-Hungarian Armed Forces. The following summer, he traveled to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was an Austro-Hungarian province at the time. Austro-Hungarian rule in the area was not very popular among many locals, who took inspiration from the late 19th century unifications of Italy and Germany. Secret groups like Serbia's Black Hand and the revolutionary Young Bosnia movement dreamed of a unified South Slavic state, rather than what they saw as foreign rule. Early in the day on Sunday, June 28, 1914, Young Bosnia member Nedeljko Čavrinović attempted to toss a grenade into the Archduke's touring car, but missed his target, injuring other bystanders on the scene. Ferdinand decided to alter his afternoon plans to include a visit to the hospital where these bystanders were receiving treatment, but no one bothered to update the Archduke's driver for the day. This caused confusion during the actual trip to the hospital, requiring the driver to stop and reverse down a crowded street, hoping to rejoin the correct route. This took the car right past 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, also a committed Young Bosnia supporter. Recognizing his moment, he fired 2 lethal shots into the car, slaying both the Archduke and his wife. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary responded by declaring war on Serbia, triggering a string of events that inevitably led to the First World War. So technically, around 17 million lives were lost because that driver didn't have the right directions. Another deadly communication breakdown happened in September of 1788 during the Austro-Turkish War between the Royal House of Habsburg and the Ottoman Empire. As the vast Austrian army set up camps around the town of Karansebes in present-day Romania, various units went out to scout the area for any Ottoman presence. What specifically happened next has become the subject of much speculation over the ensuing years and can't be verified with any kind of certainty. In some accounts, several of these patrolling units came across native Romanians who sold them alcohol, which triggered fights among the increasingly intoxicated soldiers. Other reports suggest the ensuing violence was simply the result of that pesky fog of war. Regardless of the initial spark, several units of Austrian soldiers began firing. As the violence spread, so did confusion. Some claim to have heard soldiers yelling, "Turks!" indicating that the Ottoman army was approaching, even though they weren't. Others suggest that calls by officers to halt the violence were misinterpreted as cries of Allah, indicating that Ottoman soldiers were already there on the scene, even though, again, they weren't. What started as a minor squabble on the outskirts of the Austrian army camp soon spread to the camp itself, where 100,000 soldiers were stationed. One general saw the violence in the distance and assumed the Ottoman cavalry was preparing to charge, and ordered his artillery unit to fire on his own men. After a full day or more of chaos, the army essentially abandoned its position at Karansebes. When the Ottoman army eventually did arrive, they found only the aftermath of the battle and were able to take the town without significant conflict. This makes it tricky to arrive at an estimate for the actual deaths that resulted from the friendly fire incident. There were no primary accounts of the affair that distinguished Austrian army losses related to friendly fire. Losses from actual military engagements with the Ottoman enemy, deaths from diseases, and other unrelated casualties. In a 1968 biography of Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II, author Paul Bernard suggests there were around 10,000 casualties from the battle, which would be a pretty massive unforced error. But this estimate has been widely disputed. The 1846 Oregon Treaty between the United States and Great Britain resolved a border dispute around Canadian territory. However, the treaty's vague wording created an entirely separate problem. San Juan Island, part of a cluster of islands off the coast of Vancouver, was now in a disputed area claimed by both countries. For over a decade, things remained peaceful on the island, until June of 1859, when an American farmer shot and killed a pig eating potatoes in his garden. Geez, where's Charlotte in her damn web when you need her? The pig was owned by a British fur trader, and when he complained to his local government official, UK authorities threatened to arrest the shooter and deport all Americans off of the island for good. This triggered notoriously anti-British American General William S. Harney to send his own force of 64 troops to the island. Not to be outdone, Governor of British Columbia James Douglas sent along 3 warships. By some estimates, the military standoff involved these warships, 84 guns, and a total of 2,600 men, before cooler heads prevailed. British Admiral Lambert Baines is sometimes credited as the hero of the Pig War, telling the governor he refused to involve 2 great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. We have to agree, though by all accounts, it was some pig. Though the battle was prevented, the border dispute itself wasn't fully resolved until May 21, 1871, when an international commission formally awarded the island to the United States. Now, the only pig-related offense that can get you booted off is asking for turkey bacon. In 1962, during the omnipresent Cold War standoff between the US and the Soviet Union, the Soviets started placing nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba to deter any potential US invasion. After an American U-2 spy plane captured photographic evidence of the missile facilities in Cuba, President John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade to prevent the delivery of any more weapons to the island. Apparently, they were unflattering photographs. While all this was happening, a group of 4 Russian submarines arrived in the waters around Cuba, unbeknownst to the U.S. Navy. Each sub had a nuclear missile on board capable of reaching targets on the U.S. mainland. Due to the U.S. naval blockade of Cuba, American ships were firing occasional depth charges into the water, not to sink any Russian submarines that may be down there, but to force them to surface to identify themselves. To make sure there weren't any atomic-level mix-ups, U.S. military officials notified Moscow of their intentions. The problem was, Moscow was no longer in constant radio contact with the Soviet submarine commanders, and this vital message did not get passed along. The even bigger problem was, these naval commanders were fully empowered to launch their nuclear payloads against the U.S. if threatened. almost certainly triggering World War III. On October 27, 1962, a B-59 Soviet submarine, captained by Valentin Savitska, encountered U.S. depth charges and assumed they were being attacked by the U.S. Savitska dove the vessel deeper into the ocean, making communication with the outside world impossible. With temperatures climbing to over 100 degrees and air running low on board, the pressure was on, in more ways than one. Savitska was ready to fire his nuclear torpedo, but needed the agreement of 3 other senior officers on board to finalize the launch. Thankfully for the entire world, one of those officers was cool-headed Fleet Commander Vasily Arkhipov, who insisted that the depth charges were an attempt to communicate, not to destroy. When the submarine finally surfaced, it was met by a U.S. destroyer without further violence. The Cuban Missile Crisis itself ended the following day, when Soviet First Secretary Nikita Khrushchev publicly agreed to remove the weapons from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. agreement not to invade the island, and not to reimagine the standoff 50 years later in an X-Men movie. 1 out of 2 ain't bad. So what do you think? Feel better about some of the mistakes you've made in your life? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.